which was an obvious name, but not very funny. But there was also fine, for fine is not Emacs. And sign, for sign is not Emacs. And Ina, for Ina is not Emacs. And mince, for mince is not complete Emacs. And version 2 of Ina was called Zwei, for Zwei was Ina initially. So I looked for a recursive acronym, something is not Unix, blank INU. But nothing of that form was a word as far as I knew. And if it doesn't have a second meaning, it's not a joke. So what can I do? I had the idea of making a contraction to get rid of the I. I could have a 3-letter recursive acronym, blank NU, something's not Unix. So, as an engineer, I systematically tried the possible initials. Anu, Banu, Knu, Danu, Inu, Fnu, GNU. Well, GNU is the most humor-charged word in the English language, used in countless wordplays, because, according to the dictionary, the G is silent and the word is pronounced new. So anytime you want to write new, you can spell it GNU, and you've got a joke. Maybe not a very good joke, but there are lots of them. So given a specific, meaningful reason to use this as the name of a software project, I couldn't resist. But when it's the name of our system, please do not follow the dictionary. If you call it the new operating system, you'll get people confused, because we've been working on it for 26 years now, and we've been using a version of it for 18 years, so it's not new anymore. But it still is GNU, and it will always be GNU. So please pronounce it that way. It will always be the GNU system, despite the people who erroneously call it Linux. But how did such a blatant error get started? It was a confusion at a particular inconvenient moment in the system's history. During the 1980s, our job as developers of the GNU system was to either find or write all of these components that we needed, hundreds of components at least, for a Unix-like operating system. By 1990, we had almost all of the system, but one major essential component was missing, and that was the kernel. The kernel is the component in the system that allocates the machine's resources to all the other programs you run. So in 1990, the Free Software Foundation hired a programmer to write the GNU kernel. I just chose the design. I chose to design our kernel as follows. The bottom level would be an existing microkernel, and we would just have to write the top half. And this would be a bunch of modular programs called servers that communicate with each other, and each one does just one kind of job. And then I thought, since these programs would be running in user space, if one of them has an error, it would not crash the whole machine, and you'd be able to debug it with an ordinary source-level debugger. So I thought, in all these ways, the development would go faster, and we would produce something powerful and elegant. It didn't turn out that way. It doesn't work well enough to recommend people use it. But fortunately, we didn't have to wait for that, because in 1991, a college student named Torvalds wrote his own kernel. He used the usual monolithic design, and he got it to work at a minimal level in less than a year. That kernel was called Linux, and initially it was not free software. Because because it was released under a license that did not allow commercial distribution. So users that were businesses could not have Freedom 2 or Freedom 3. And if the license doesn't allow all users, any kind of user, to have freedom, then it's not a free software license. However, in 1992, Torvalds liberated Linux by releasing it under the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL, which was one of the various free software licenses that existed at the time. That's the one that I have written for use in most of the components we developed for the GNU system. But I wrote the license so that it was easy for anybody to release her software under that license. And so Torvalds decided to do that. At that point, by combining Linux the kernel with GNU the operating system, people made a complete free operating system, which was basically GNU, but also contained Linux. In other words, it was the GNU/Linux operating system. But the people who made this combination were focusing all their attention on this one component, Linux. They thought of all the rest of the system as a small add-on, a side issue. So they started speaking of the combination. I'd be on the lookout for the cases which are software as a service. Another topic is free software and the government. Government agencies must use exclusively free software, because a government agency does its computing not for its own good, but rather for the people. So it has a responsibility to maintain control of its computing so as to assure it's done in the way that is right for the people. A government agency must never allow its computing to fall into private hands. That's, if you lose control of your computing, that's harm to you. If the government agency loses control of its computing, that's not just harm to the government agency, that's a failure to do its duty. So, but using a proprietary program means losing control of your computing. So government agencies must never do that. Never. They should use 100% free software. It's the government's responsibility to migrate its agencies away from all proprietary software. In addition, when governments distribute software to the public, it must always be free software, including the JavaScript programs in their web pages. And when government agencies communicate with the public, they must use protocols supported by free software, so that this communication does not pressure people to use proprietary software. Many governments around the world fail to meet those standards.